The sun beat down on the asphalt, baking the air into a stifling haze. Sweat trickled down Maya's temples as she fumbled with her keys, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Finally, the lock clicked open, and she swung the car door wide, a sigh of relief escaping her lips. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," a gruff voice barked, cutting through her moment of reprieve. Maya froze, her hand hovering over the steering wheel. Two towering figures in blue uniforms loomed over her, their faces etched with an unsettling mix of suspicion and disdain. "Excuse me?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "You heard me," one of the officers repeated, his voice laced with an edge of menace. "Out of the car." Maya's mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Had she committed some minor traffic violation? Was this some sort of elaborate prank? But the cold, hard glint in the officer's eyes quickly dispelled any lingering doubts. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something far more sinister. With trembling hands, Maya reached for her purse, pulling out her driver's license and registration. "Here you go, officer. Everything's in order." The officer snatched the documents from her grasp, his eyes scanning the information with a practiced indifference. "And where did you get this car?" he demanded, his tone dripping with suspicion. "I bought it," Maya replied, her voice rising in a mixture of confusion and indignation. "It's mine." The officer scoffed, a dismissive snort escaping his lips. "Oh yeah? And where's the proof?" Maya's blood ran cold. "Proof? What kind of proof did they expect?" "The title is in my name," she insisted, her voice cracking under the mounting pressure. "I can show you." The officers exchanged a knowing glance, a silent communication that sent shivers down Maya's spine. "That's not good enough," the first officer declared, his voice hardening. "We need to see some identification that matches the name on the title." Maya's heart plummeted. She knew exactly what they were implying. Her name, a stark contrast to the pale faces of the officers before her, was a red flag in their eyes. They didn't believe her. They didn't trust her. "I have my passport," she offered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "It has my name and picture." The officer hesitated, his gaze lingering on Maya's face, her dark skin, her expressive eyes. Finally, he nodded, a grudging concession. "Fine," he barked, "but if this doesn't match, you're going downtown." With trembling hands, Maya retrieved her passport from her purse, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of her pepper spray, a silent prayer for strength and courage. Maya handed her passport to the officer, her heart pounding in her chest. He scrutinized the document, his eyes scanning the photo, the name, the date of birth. Finally, he sighed and handed it back. "It's a match," he grunted, his voice barely audible. Maya breathed a sigh of relief. She had her identification, but she knew that wasn't enough. They were still looking for a reason to detain her, to find some excuse to justify their suspicion. "Now, let's see that title," the other officer barked, his voice cutting through the tension. Maya reached into her purse, her fingers trembling as she retrieved the document. She handed it over, her eyes locked on the officer's face, her heart pounding in her ears. The officer took the title, flipping through the pages, his eyes scanning the information. Maya watched him closely, her breath held in anticipation. "Everything checks out," he finally announced, his voice flat and emotionless. Maya let out a sigh of relief. She had her identification, her title, everything they had demanded. But she knew that wasn't enough. They were still looking for a reason to detain her, to find some excuse to justify their suspicion. The first officer stepped forward, his face etched with a sneer. "But that doesn't mean you're not lying," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "We know people like you, trying to get away with something. Maya's blood ran cold. She knew what he was implying. Her skin color, her name, they were enough to make her a suspect in their eyes. "I'm not lying," she protested, her voice rising in frustration. "I bought this car fair and square. I have the receipts to prove it." The officers exchanged a glance, a silent communication that sent shivers down Maya's spine. They didn't believe her. They didn't trust her. "Receipts?" the first officer scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "Those could be forged." Maya's heart sank. She knew he was right. Receipts were easy to fake, especially if you knew the right people. But she had nothing else. No proof of ownership, no witnesses, nothing to back up her claim. "We're going to have to take this car in for further inspection," the second officer announced, his voice cold and authoritative. "We need to make sure it wasn't stolen." Maya's stomach twisted into knots. They were going to impound her car? Take it away from her? No, she couldn't let that happen. She had worked too hard for this car, saved up for months to make the down payment. This was her only means of transportation, her lifeline to her job, to her independence. "No," she protested, her voice rising in desperation. "You can't do that. I have the right to my property." The officers ignored her, their eyes fixed on the car. They opened the door, their hands reaching inside, searching for any hidden compartments, any signs of tampering. Maya watched helplessly as they rummaged through her car, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew they wouldn't find anything. The car was clean, it was hers. But she also knew that wouldn't matter to them. They were determined to find something, anything, to justify their suspicion. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the officers stepped back from the car, their faces etched with disappointment. They hadn't found anything. But they still weren't satisfied. "We're going to have to take you in for questioning," the first officer announced, his voice cold and unforgiving. "We need to find out more about this car." Maya's heart sank. She knew this wasn't going to end well. They were going to take her in, interrogate her, try to intimidate her into confessing to some crime she didn't commit. "No," she protested, her voice rising in desperation. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I have done nothing wrong." The officers ignored her, their hands reaching for her wrists. Maya struggled, kicking and screaming, but they were too strong for her. They overpowered her, dragging her out of the car, her feet scraping against the hot asphalt. Maya fought back, her nails digging into their flesh, her teeth snapping at their hands. But it was no use. They were too strong, too determined. They dragged her to the police car, her body limp and lifeless. As the door slammed shut, Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She was trapped, alone, at the mercy of two racist cops who were determined to ruin her life.